I'm Mike Berry.
I'm Renee Langevin.
And I'm Sean. And this is explained. All right, welcome to Explained. Today, our guest joins us from across the pond in the UK. This is Victoria Hedlund, aka the Bias Girl, a former physics teacher turned researcher, lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London, author, founder of the GenEdLabs.ai. Her work centers on auditing and mitigating bias and equity gaps in generative AI tools for schools. So welcome, Victoria.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
We're honored too. So we start every podcast with the same question. First, we ask folks to introduce themselves and tell us about their journey. But then the second part of that is to tell us what AI means to you.
Okay, so I'll deal with the first bit. Introduce myself. I'm Victoria. I work at Goldsmiths, but I also research separately as well. I used to be a physics teacher. I've worked in a school as a teaching assistant, focusing in a SEND unit to try and adapt teaching materials to children. And now I train teachers on the primary and secondary PGCEs, which is great. I love it. And I research into bias in science education. So I was recently at the Institute of Physics talking to other teachers there in teacher education about what to watch out for in terms of outputs and how we can ensure they're equitable, which I'm sure I'll talk about some more now. The second bit, what AI means to me. AI means to me the opportunity for pupils, children to access learning in a way that they couldn't before. So I'm an artist, I'm a physicist, I'm a strange hybrid, but I'm not very good with words, as you probably know, especially academic writing. I can do it, I can get by, but it doesn't come easy to me. So GenAI is a way of making my inside world available to the outside world. So I see it like a bridge, a connecting mechanism between almost the subjective and objective realms, if you like. And I think that the power of this to help children and adults, but we're focusing mainly on children here, is phenomenal. But it has to be done with care, because the very personalized aspects of GenAI that can enable and empower children in this way can also be used to gatekeep and close down futures and identities for them. And so I'm kind of sitting in that bipolar kind of space of, I think it's very, very, very good. There's a lot of good that can come of it, but it needs to be used with care. And we have to be critical, and we have to be enabling and cautious with what we do. And so I'm going through my current research, trying to break that down into specific little ideas and little aspects and little tips for teachers, so that we can kind of have tangible ways of using GenAI for the empowering aspect without having to worry too much about the gatekeeping aspect.
I love that statement about helping to get what's inside your head out and available to the rest of the world. We're trying to do that with Sean as well, but that is just a great way to describe it. Now, before we got on the show, we were kind of talking, getting to know each other, and you had asked about how we organize our districts and how, different districts are organized and how that pertains to equity in particular. So my question is kind of around that. There's a lot of money being thrown at tech initiatives right now to support students and to support schools, allegedly, in attacking the generative AI world that's coming at us. And we know that the UK announced a tech first drive that's coming out. From your lens, so an example in Vermont, where we're from, different school districts approach things differently. And what happens is inequities. When you look at something like that tech first drive in the UK, what are your concerns about equity and how that's going to sugar out for students and families and communities?
I think the further we go along that path, the more disparity seems to come, and it's almost like I can visualize different pathways and different scenarios that children could be forced along. And there's overseeing decisions that will enable these children to go down these pathways or stop these pathways completely. So that's my lens. It's kind of systems thinking approach, I suppose, as to kind of how this enables or disables children's paths going forwards. So, I mean, obviously you've got kind of digital poverty and the access to the actual GenAI facilities. And one of the bugbears that I have is a lot of the chatbots have free versions and pro versions. I'm going to focus on chatbots just for now, and then I'll look at AI tutoring systems and marketing or whatever a bit later. So if you look at that, some of the research that I do, you can end up getting different responses based on different models. And so you've got the free versions, which will have in my experience, and what my research shows, is that these basic models will produce less bias-aware answers than the ones that you have to pay for, obviously, because they're more frontier, cutting edge. And so you've got this disparity in home life without even looking at the schools. And so then if you extrapolate that into schools, into the budgets and the finances that schools have and what they're able to buy, and the recent announcements from Google that we've had yesterday with their fabulous suite of things that they're going to be offering for children and schools. Again, what schools can afford and the different tiers that are available to schools, again, will help to close or open doorways for children. And so it becomes an issue of equity based on finance and understanding around tech and what tech you can buy before you even get into the training aspects of which schools can afford to provide professional development for their teachers, and whether it's going to be ongoing professional development, which is what is needed, rather than 1 hour in an afternoon where everyone's knackered. So there's all of these kind of compound factors that I feel are going to feed into this widening of gaps in equity with GenAI, because there's so many compounding decisions and variations. We're going to end up with, private schools over here, but schools where they've got a lot of money to invest, where arguably the equity is probably, it's going to have more privilege maybe at home, but with their access to models than they would at school. And then the other side of a highly deprived school that can't afford the models, that can't afford these memberships to workspaces and whatnot. And so you've got completely different experiences. We've just had over here, Ofsted, who's our regulatory body, have just released a paper on 24 schools, I think that's right, like 21, the best practice that's happened over here. And they've concluded that the biggest risk is to do nothing, which I agree with, but also they've pulled out that schools have AI champions, and they've made this big thing about AI champions in schools. I think these early adopters with the AI champions, they're probably going to be the ones that are going to have more options and be more open to providing equitable pathways than the late adopters that don't have the finance, the resource, the cultural capital themselves to pull in. So, it's not just financial, it's the digital literacy of the staff and the area, and how that feeds into the communities as well. I mean, what do your parents think about the use of GenAI? How does their lived experience feed into these kind of corporate learning management systems? So I think it's a very long way round of saying that when you're looking at chatbot use, I think there's more options. But when I think the biggest risk is with the learning management systems within schools and the AI tutors and these automated systems, marking, feedback, assessment, those kinds of aspects, because it's what's happening within the schools that you can't see. I really see the future of GenAI in education and the future of the teacher moving more towards being an overseer of equitable pathways with GenAI use, rather than actually the deliverer or facilitator of knowledge. So, I mean, let me give you an example, if that helps. So, for my science research that I'm doing, you get different answers on how a light bulb works up, depending on if you ask a girl or a boy. I have a girl and a boy. I tried a similar question just with ChatGPT over Easter to make an Easter worksheet for them. I said, create an Easter worksheet for my daughter and then for my son. That was all the information I did, no memory on or anything. And my son got Easter maths that was much harder than my daughter because it had associated from its training data. And so it closed down that avenue for my daughter and enabled for my son. And I think if you extrapolate that into the many decisions that these systems will be making daily, that the teacher who would classically be the gatekeeper of those decisions, as a teacher, you decide, don't you, the cognitive level of the questioning or the task that you give. This is going to be based on a set of assumptions based on the embeddings that are kind of the worst stereotypes of society. So it doesn't seem, you can litigate against it from a little bit, but fundamentally the work needs to be done on the training data and the model design. And I think that's where it needs to go in education, localized models that build in the lived experience of your culture, of your stakeholders, your mindset, and kind of to de-bias the data that you've got. Otherwise, the gaps are just going to grow. I mean, I see the attainment gaps over here. I mean, we have huge underrepresentation of women in science. And with this example that I've just found here about, girls get less good quality science explanation than boys, that's just going to force the gap even wider. So yeah, in short, I told you I like to ramble on. In short, I think there's multiple ways that it can affect equity, both financially, in terms of training needs, in terms of lived experience of culture, and in terms of the actual management systems themselves and these kind of automated decisions that we need to be aware of.
No, that is not rambling. I'm like hanging on every word. It's very interesting. And so it sounded like you said that one of the best options would be for schools to have their own, run their own large language model. Is that what you were saying? Like ultimately to move towards your own, very specific model for your own school system?
I think there are some people doing that. I've spoken to some people over here that have been doing that. And I think, again, this is probably something that more the private sector over here has the finance and the resource to do. But I do know people in state schools that are doing it as well, because they can take the Gemma suite from Google and they can run their own models through that, which, from what I understand, and data privacy is not my strong point, but, it's not my area of focus, sorry. But it seems as you can control a lot more of the variables if you do that yourself. So I do wonder if that's eventually where things will go, or if that's just so resource intensive and reliant on the fact that you have these AI champions within your schools, that there will be this kind of consistency model. I mean, I really see a future where you've got deprived, disadvantaged children having a very standard bias rife GenAI experience, and at the other end some children in schools running their own models that are very bias aware, having these pathways, having transparency, seeing, making sure everything's okay and that everybody is challenged sufficiently, regardless of their starting points. I see these two extremes coming. And it worries me, if I'm honest.
Yeah. In the meantime, you have like a lesson plan analysis tool.
Oh yeah, my lesson inspector.
Yeah, would you like to talk about the lesson inspector and how that can help?
Oh, right. Well, we have, from working in teacher training, PowerPoint is the bane of our existence, because back in the day when I trained, you wrote everything on pieces of paper on triplicate, those carbon copies. You wheeled them around with you. Everything was planned out. If you didn't have that, you were done for. Occasionally, you might have a scheme of work, photocopy a few worksheets. Woo, I don't have to make them myself. You're nodding, so I think you know where I'm from. I find now that most schools have standardized schemes of work and standardized PowerPoints. And when people are new to teaching, they think a PowerPoint is a lesson plan. And that, no, a PowerPoint is a resource, but contains decisions, a rationale for how your lesson will go, but it is not a lesson plan. So I think GenAI is an extrapolation or an extension of that, basically, whereas now you can go into ChatGPT or Gemini or wherever, your chatbot of choice, and you can type in, do me a lesson on electricity for year 6, and it will give you what it thinks is a good lesson plan based on its data set, which isn't a good lesson plan. It's a bunch of normative decisions that it's decided to make for you. And so I got really fed up with this. So I made the lesson inspector to try and provide scaffolded critical reflection points. So we over here, we have a teacher training curriculum that's come in the last couple of years called the ITT-ECF, which it's a bit like the national curriculum was for knowledge, but it's for teacher training. And it says what trainees should know and what they should do, learn that and how to. And so I took the themes from that, like cognitive science, prior knowledge, metacognition. It's got a variety of criteria. And I used that as the basis, combined with a few other assumptions like neuro-affirming practice is what we want, not medicalized language, and social equity is what we want as well. We don't want to close all these few assumptions I've embedded within it. And then you can put a lesson plan into the lesson inspector and it will give you feedback on different aspects of your lesson plan. So it will look at, are you looking to consider the difference between the prior knowledge that the student turns up with and what they leave with? Are you planning to measure that? So it's quite useful, I think, for teachers early on in their teaching, for the first year of training over here. And then our training program is another 2 years, and their ECTs for another 2 years. So it's 3 years until they're a properly qualified teacher. By the end of that, because I know experienced teachers will just rock up and pull it out of their head because you've got the experience that you perhaps don't need it all written down on paper. So arguably, it's perhaps not as useful there, but for teachers early on, or we've had some schools that have been interested, who are kind of progressive schools or have different approaches to teaching and learning, and they want to look for common themes across all of their teachers. So if you haven't got a highly restrictive ethos and teaching style in your school, and you've got a lot of different people doing their different things, they like it because it gives them some standard metrics and measures on which to kind of see, well, are we looking at misconceptions across subjects, or, are we looking at oracy, or are we looking at mastery? And I'm hopefully working with the school going forwards where we're looking at making a UDL persona for it. And so it will deconstruct a lesson plan and map it to the different areas and choices within the UDL. So that's the research project we've got going forwards for that. So that'd be really interesting. So that was my idea, that I could provide different personas, and then we use like majority voting to kind of get different ideas on what the lesson plan is like around these themes. Because I thought, well, if I observe a teacher and you observe a teacher, we'd all come up with different interpretations roughly centered around the same things, but we'd all have our own biases, right? So we've tried to replicate that within the lesson plan inspector as well, to promote critical reflection, so that trainees can, even if they don't design something themselves, if they take it from the school, they can put it through it, or they can use ChatGPT and put it through it. And I've looked at some lesson plan providers, like we've got TeachMate's a big one over here, and then there's the Twinkle one that does it as well, and then we've got a government-backed one called ILA from the Oak Academy, which has is free, and they're promoting the use of that. That gives you it's got a very standard formula. So from analysing loads and loads of these lesson plans from the different lesson plan generators, I start to see patterns. For instance, Isla is very big on cognitive science. TeachMate's a bit more about adaptive teaching. Winkle doesn't write very much, but is quite adaptive, gives quite a few options. So there's almost like these digital identities, these GenAI identities. So I wrote a piece at the beginning of the year kind of saying that as things go forwards, I think teachers are going to have to think about what their GenAI identity is and how their tool use matches to that. So, you know, if I've got a very effective stance to teaching, I might not want to use cognitive science aspects, so I might not want to use either. So I'm going to pick a tool that will help me along, that aligns with my values. So I think we've moved away from like, oh yeah, I can get a lesson plan. Wow, look, it makes a lesson plan. So yeah, but is it any good? Does it match who I am and how I think? And, you know, I'm an organic being. So does this match how I would want to teach this lesson? Or is this just, you know, I'm just looking at this thinking, I don't see myself in this at all. So, and I think this is more of an area for existing teachers. It's easier for trainee teachers and pre-service teachers because they haven't developed their teaching identity yet. And so their GenAI identity will be part of that moving forwards, I think. But for existing teachers, that it is an issue because there's resistance there as well. There's GenAI inertia. You know, well, I'm a teacher. I teach this way. I don't want to use that. So it's kind of, it's all related by GenAI, but there's a lot going on in that space. Yeah.
I think it's unfortunate that this kind of work isn't being done at the ed tech companies that are developing these tools, because as we've been hearing from you and from other guests, that the onus is on the teacher
Definitely
to adapt the tool, to try to root out the bias, you know, the inequities. One of the reasons I reached out to you was you had done a post when OpenAI came out with their K-12 prompting guide. And the process that you used where you took one of their sample, I guess it was a sample prompt, and then put it through, I think it was ChatGPT, but then started asking those questions of what assumptions are being made here, what biases are included. I've been using that actually at my school.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've had some teachers dabble in just creating some custom chatbots for low level, very specific, like we're going to use this custom chatbot for first draft revision, you know, for students. But as we were writing the prompts for those custom chatbots, we went through that process first. So the teacher came up with a prompt and I said, okay, now ask it what assumptions are being made, what biases. And so that's helpful for sure. And all of these discoveries happen through that process, which was very helpful to our teachers as well. So thank you so much for posting about that.
Oh, brilliant. I'm really pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
It's
great.
Yeah.
I was so excited to try it, and then I've been using it a lot. But because the onus is on us, what are some practical ways that you've mentioned some already, but that educators can help to think about all of the different types of bias? I know you've identified through your research, I can't remember the number, 10 common types of bias, maybe?
Yeah, at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, so how can teachers, first of all, have those on their radar and then think about how can they maybe use intentional prompting to mitigate some of those biases?
So from the research I've done recently, which is quite a big finding, I think, the words that you use are so important, and I'm trying to get specific quantifiable examples of this in practice. So for example, one of the things I'm going to write about soon is if you include the word please in your prompts. So please tell me how a light bulb lights up, or you just write tell me how a light bulb lights up, you will get different answers because the word please, it will associate with more formal language, and it will make that assumption that if the language is more formal, then you must be more educated. And so you will get different quality of answer just based on the inclusion of please or not please. So if you take that as a teacher, and this is quite worrying if we're going to use transcripts going forwards of children or classrooms. I know that's a big thing, isn't it, about recording what goes on, audio or video in the classroom and then putting it through GenAI for analysis. If you imagine the assumptions that are going to be made there with the language of the child and how that relates to their culture or their upbringing or affluence, there's a whole bunch of factors there. So it leaves you quite vulnerable as a teacher. I do feel like teachers have been abandoned. And the reason I think we've been abandoned is because, and I think this goes across the globe, if, countries want there to be competition. They want to be forerunners in AI and technology because of the money that's involved in it, because of the political drivers. And so if you clamp down and you tell teachers exactly what to do, how to be bias aware, how to use GenAI, then you are stifling that competition between countries, between companies. And so that to me seems to be the driver. I mean, I may be wrong, but that's how it occurs to me. So you're very much left on your own devices or within your institution as to how to deal with it. We've been given guidance recently from the Chartered Institute and the Department of Education. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's quite good. And a lot of people that are involved in that. And it touches on bias and it talks about critical overview and it talks about the language that you use, which I think is really important and worth mentioning for teachers. How you talk about it in mechanistic terms rather than treating it as a person, and then the implications of that are for them not wanting to use it as kind of a therapy bot or as a companion. And so I think that's one aspect that's quite important. But we haven't been given much in the way of bias. And so I'm trying to flesh that out. So where I want to get to with this series, and I'm going to do a book and ask a series of people to contribute to it, is that I want to have kind of some Uber prompts. Because you need to constrain it. This is how it's appearing to me at the moment. And I want to substantiate this with actual empirical evidence as well. But the more you constrain it, give me a lesson on electricity for year 6, use a range of cognitive styles, in brackets, this means, and then perhaps you look at the context of the children that you've got within your class, but be aware of processing needs, be aware of sensory needs, reflect different cultures. But you need to be as specific as possible. The words to avoid, it's occurring to me, and I'm going to try and get some evidence for this as well, are words like make it relevant. That's one of the worst things you can put, make it relevant, make it engaging, reflect their interests. Any kind of language that is tied to assumptions on what a child's their social capital could be, which you think would be a good thing, right? You're putting it, make it engaging or making it interesting or make it relevant because you want it to be, accessible to them and personally relevant. But actually the inclusion of that within the prompt at the moment in our current systems actually reflects the opposite. It will just pull the statistically most likely stereotype that goes with that. And so we end up with fairies and magic and unicorns for girls, and dinosaurs and forts and race cars. It's obsessed with race cars for boys. And funnily enough for men, it's video games and bars. And for women, we get everything in terms of domestic budgets and kitchens. That's terrible. It really is. So in terms of tips for teachers, avoid these 3 words: engaging, relevant, interesting, anything open-ended and subjective. Instead of using the word engaging, think about what you're actually asking there. You know your children. What are their interests? What are engaging to them? So it kind of asks you to look and spec out your children a little bit more. So put their interests in, obviously not personal data or anything like that. But, that they like football at the weekends or whatever. And then it will pull out the associations there. If you think about it, from the pathways and the embeddings, will pull out what you're actually seeking. I'm hoping to make an Uber prompt that will it'll be very long, that will cover all of these biases, and then then a structure that will review that as well. But I have to be careful with the interplay of the different aspects. That's why I'm treating the different areas of bias as little distinct chunks at the moment, because I found if I put too much in with the context window, it will miss the middle bit out. So that's why I'm doing it as iteratively. So the best thing to do is just to ask, like you said there, what assumptions have you made here? How are they related to bias? How could this lesson plan or lesson resource be viewed as neuronormative, or just reflect Western values? Ask it questions like that, and ask it to justify itself, how it's not bias. That's a good one as well. Other fun things to do are to take what it's done from one chatbot and put it in another one and say, hey, look, your buddy's made this. What do you think? What do you think, Gemini, about what ChatGPT is throwing out here? Oh, look, Claude. What do you think? How biased is this? That's a bit of fun, that is. And I think one of the best things to do is also to get this kind of community within your school, within your phase or department, of like you are doing here, of talking about it and saying, look what it's done here. What do you think about this? And so that's a leadership decision within schools of making space, making sandbox environments for people to have a go, which is essentially what you've said you've done, and reflect on it and get other opinions and say, well, how could I stop that from happening? But the tighter you can make your prompts, and the more detail you can give about your context and your learners, the better the outcome will be generally. So I'm looking to substantiate that now with research evidence, which will be my life the next 4 years, I think. I'm not sure if that's helpful. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I'll be watching very carefully.
Yeah, Victoria, I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask you on the air if you'll come back for a second episode, because I'm guessing Renee, Sean, and I have all scribbled down a whole pathway of additional questions for you. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Sean's got a Post-it. That's a high compliment right there. That Sean.
I rarely use a pen. Yeah.
Good job. So would you come back and talk to us some more?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to, be honest. Thank you.
Awesome. The way you framed things today was different than I've heard so far, and really, really powerful. And I appreciate that so much. And just, I think that you've given us a new way to think about how we process with educators in terms of approaching this. And I feel like I have some tangible things that I can pull on to really combat the struggles around bias and equity from what you've said today. So I sincerely appreciate that very, very much. And we'll get you back on very soon, which would be very cool.
I look forward to that. Thank you for your time and having me on. It's great to see what you're doing and how that's making an effect, and how you're pushing the boundaries within your work.
No, thank you. It was amazing.